Hi, everyone.
Hello. Salutations.
Responding to discussion. Elliot, did you want to go first?
No.
Okay. So one of my responses, I guess, to the discussion is when Matthew was bringing up well, how do you want them to write about love? Do you want them to talk about the sweetness or not? And I guess I realized that part of my issue is that I believe / was taught that love isn't so much an emotion as a choice. Infatuation is the emotion, whereas love itself is more of a choice. And I think that may also be why I don't necessarily agree with the whole idea of other halves and everything, is because there is no choice in that. And so it's love is a wonderful thing and everything, but it also is a struggle, and it also has its moments of sweetness, but also its moments of difficulties. But I also can't agree with the idea that love is pain because it's a choice. So if love becomes painful for you, why would you stay? And it brings me to the concept of abuse, which again takes away that choice. But it's difficult for me to take a more, I guess, practical approach that I have and apply it to this emotional aspect that we've been talking about so much. So I guess that may be why I have trouble agreeing with anyone.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's
Entirely different for you.
For me, it's very difficult to speak to any of these people's writings on love because, I don't love being super personal about this, but I am engaged, and I've been engaged for almost 5 years. Well, no, I haven't been engaged. I've been in that relationship for almost 5 years and engaged for almost 2 years. So for me, it's very difficult for me to find any of their experiences that speak to the way that I see and experience and have loved people. In my experience, it's never been fully bitter, and it's also never been fully sweet. So when people say things like, oh, you would always want to be joined with your other half, I'm like, that's not necessarily true, because then I would lose out on a lot of the value of seeing and experiencing my person's viewpoints and presence and all of these other things that make spending time with them unique. But at the same time, people are like, yeah, you don't want to always be with them. You want boundaries, and you want to spending time away from them is sweet too. And I'm like, also not that.
That's direct shade at me, by the way.
Also very much not that. So I don't know. I feel like maybe it's more difficult to disentangle and approach this from a non-personal perspective.
Yeah, and it also doesn't help that I'm also a hopeless romantic. So I don't know how those two parts of me, coexist. But the other thing I do find interesting is that in, ancient olden yonder times, Jesus, antiquity, they had the idea of being literally one person, and nowadays our kind of version of that is soulmates and soulmate marks and stuff, and having that literal
where it's more of
symbol of completion.
Yeah, I would say it's more of a matched pair than it is a single person.
Yeah, and it's not a single person, but the souls are meant to match up or whatever. Some people interpret that as two halves of the soul, not necessarily two halves of a physical body. And I find those stories fascinating and everything, but at the same time, I'm not super in love with the idea of a relationship or a love that I am obligated to be in, or I have to be in because they are the other half, they are the perfect person. That takes away my agency, and that doesn't let me pick and decide.
I mean, just because someone is your soulmate, it doesn't mean you have to choose to be with them. Someone can be perfectly suited for you, and you can say, well, that's great, but I like someone else better.
But then we get to the social stigma part of it, is because society tells you if you find that perfect half or that soulmate, then you should like just stay with them and everything. And so
but there's no way in our current society to tell if you found your soulmate.
Well, yeah, but you see it in the media, like people talking about how they're each other's halves and stuff like that, and like the media pushes this idea that when you find the perfect person, you hold on to them no matter what, even if you doubt yourself or whatever. Like I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I think that idea that the media pushes that is highly gendered, because it
No,
seems like
that's
the
true.
expectation that you would find like a single soulmate and stick with them forever and ever loyally is pushed mainly onto women. Whereas with men, it's like it's much less.
Yeah. With men, it's you have a soulmate, but also you can sleep with as many women as you want. James Bond. But
does the James Bond franchise go into the idea of a soulmate?
Well, kind of. More like the first. He has a first love.
That's very different.
We gotta watch James Bond. Anyways, so yeah, so it's hard to unify those two separate ideas and everything, but that's kind of where my thoughts are with this topic. We'll see how reading this next speech goes. Gotta love a drunk man's thoughts. But
sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Mostly you don't.
Any last words?
No. No last words.
Okay.
Yep.
That's this week's video. See you guys in class.
Media res.
Bye.
Good evening, fellow desirers. Something I think I wanted to talk about with this week's reading is the concept of destiny and fate versus free will, and the concept of soulmates. That's something that really sparked my interest while reading this week. Most societies tend to believe in soulmates and finding your other half. Aristophanes sure did. And I want to know whether or not, is there any scientific fact to soulmates? Or is it just something we believe to feel better? Like there's someone out there for us that's perfect. And maybe we'll find them and maybe we won't. And when you break up with someone or you lose them, they're like, it's okay. So there's plenty of fish in the sea, but if you're stuck on them and that was your soulmate and they died, then if you're someone romantically inclined like I am, you may feel like it's the end of the world. And I've read books about that. There was this book called Soulless, and it was about your eyes. So you're born with two different color eyes, and one of them's your color and one of them's your soulmate's color, and they're very unique to you. And when you first make eye contact with your soulmate, your eye colors switch to you only have one eye color and they only have one eye color, and that's how you know your soulmates. But if your soulmate dies before you meet them, then the eye that is matching to theirs turns gray. And if you meet your soulmate and then they die, both your eyes turn gray. So it's like they go to this support group for people with gray eyes, and it's all about, like, you know, people call us soulless because we lost our soulmates. So, like, really, what is there left for us? Stuff like that. So it was a really interesting read. I'd highly recommend it. But it just got me thinking like this, like, what is the importance of having the other half in that society, and especially with this? So that's it.
So one thing I liked about the symposium was that they talked about specifically different forms of love. It wasn't just between two people in a relationship. It was also about like personal love or love of like your job or hobbies or things like that. Yeah, because I've talked about is like there's infinite number of forms of desire and love, and so it's hard when people just use the word eros, like in our earlier readings, that eros usually is associated with like the love between two people or sexual love, and that just became very confusing when they talked about love in general in that term, and so I was kind of curious, like there are other terms of love. I think there's strogi, philia, agape, all of them, like there's a specific word for each type of love, whether it's between family members, friendship, um, things like that. And I just thought if they're going to talk about love, it'd be easier to use those terms, since Eros is not. Eros is in the symposium, Eros is the god of love. But, well, he's one of the gods of love. He's not. There's multiple gods of love, like Aphrodite and others. And yeah, so it becomes a thing where we're just sticking to one form of love, but we're talking about multiple. So that's why I thought it was confusing. But I'm glad that we're in the books. We're now discussing that there's multiple forms of love. It's not just sexual love or the love between two people.
So, the part of the reading that I had the most trouble with was the part where Socrates was talking to Agathon and, like, talking about the things that Agathon had said in his speech, which had just happened. Specifically, the part where he said, "Then," said Socrates, "he desires that what he has at present may be preserved to him in the future, which is equivalent to saying that he desires something which is not existent to him, and which as yet he has not got." "Very true," he said. "Then he and everyone who desires that which he has not already, and which is future and not present, and which he has not and is not, and of which he is in want. These are the sort of things which love and desire seek." "Very true," he said. So the part that I was most confused about is the first part, because it sounds sort of like Socrates is saying that when you desire something that you have at present, like if you're already strong and you desire to be strong, it sounds sort of like he's saying that you desire something that's non-existent to you, but if you're already strong, then, like, it can't be non-existent to you because you possess this thing already. Because he desires that what he has at present, the being strong, may be preserved to him in the future. That makes sense. If you have something, you want to keep it. Which is equivalent to saying that he desires something which is non-existent to him. And that's where I got lost. Like, is he just saying that desiring something that you have to be preserved to you is the same as saying that you want something that you don't have? Because that seems like a contradiction in terms. Because the continuance of something is different than obtaining something. Like, those are different journeys. They're different sort of prospects. Because if you have something, then you've already gone on the journey and gotten it. You've done all your strength training, or you've done all your brain training to become this wise person, or you've, fought your way up to the top and you're very rich, are the three examples that I think he gives. Or you like take your vitamins enough that you're super healthy all the time. Like you've done the work and now you just have to do the continuation of the work, which is different than not having done the work and having to figure out how to do the work and like persevering on your journey to be strong or be rich or be healthy. So I just got a little confused there. Socrates is confusing, let's be honest. And then the other thing that I kind of wanted to talk about was like, remember further what you said in your speech, or if you do not remember, I will remind you. You said that the love of the beautiful set in order the empire of the gods, that for that of deformed things there is no love. Did you not say something of that kind? And Agathon says, yeah, I did. But I don't know if I agree with that. I don't know if you can't love things that are deformed. Where's the thing? Okay, so love set in order the empire of the gods, the love of beauty, as is evident, for with deformity love has no concern. That's not really the same as saying that, like, you can't love something that's deformed. It's a similar sentiment, but I also just don't agree with that in general. Like, when you see a really cute, like, cat or something that has... Okay, so as I was saying, I don't really agree with that. That, like, because when you see a really cute cat who only has, like, 3 legs, or they don't have a tail or something, or, like, when you see an animal that, doesn't have ears or something, or, like, they're deformed in some way, my natural reaction is just, oh, look at the puppy, like, I love them, or look at the kitty, I love them, they're so cute. Like, that's love. They're deformed, but I can still love them. But yeah, I'm not really sure where else I'm going with that, but just I don't think that because, something is deformed, that means that it can't ever be loved. That's dumb. I'm sorry, Agathon and Socrates, but that's dumb. Like, and, with what the ancient Greeks thought were deformities being like, oh, deformed of reason, or like, there were a lot more opportunities to be deformed in ancient Greece, because they applied that term not only to, like, physical things, but also to, like, mental defects, or, mental deformities or whatnot. But I don't know. I reject that piece of philosophy And, yeah, I'll stop rambling now.
Hey everyone, it's me, Marissa. A couple things that I'm going to talk about today in my response video that we spent a lot of time talking about in class is Aristophanes and whether he was joking or not. So I don't actually have an answer, spoiler alert, about whether he was or not, but I was thinking about why it was so difficult for us to figure out if he was joking or not, and I think it has to do a lot with Plato's writing style. It's like when we read any kind of fiction today, we have a lot of things like, so we would have a character saying something and it might be like, oh, John said sarcastically. So we have adverbs to kind of describe it and context clues from the character's body language or anything like that to kind of key into whether a character is being funny or making a joke. We have those kinds of things, or maybe they're like personality, whereas because of Plato's writing style, we don't really get that much. We don't get too much about what the characters are doing while they're giving their speech. We don't really get a lot about the way that they're speaking or kind of in general what they're like. So Aristophanes, of course, was a comic poet, so I think that's kind of a key in. Also the part about him needing to burp or whatever, having the hiccups during the speech before him. I think that can also clue into sort of the tone that's going in here. So I tend to lean towards the fact that he's kidding, but yeah, I'm thinking that like if this were written today, Plato would probably make it a little more obvious about what he is doing, and it had me thinking about how like we write characters today versus perhaps a less style back then where it was more focused on the words, or perhaps even where the people who were reading this back when Plato was writing it, the intended audience, they would have just been able to pick up on cues that we perhaps now cannot. Like obviously if he said it this word, or like if the word was conjugated this way, because obviously it's written in Greek, like it would be much more obvious to them if he was joking or not. So those were just some thoughts that I had while we were in class and I was thinking about behind the scenes. Also, I wanted to talk about Matthew's indignation about how we didn't like Agathon's speech. I just find that very funny. My knee-jerk reaction was, he was like, why didn't you guys like this one? I thought you guys would love this one. My first knee-jerk reaction was just to be like, we're just never satisfied. We just don't think anything's good enough. But I think actually the reason that we don't like it is it's really important to look at who is saying Agathon's speech and why he's saying it. So I think there's some really cool stuff in Agathon's speech. There's really cool stuff that I've highlighted in been like, oh, like snaps for you, like when they said that in all of the speeches. But I think what's important about his is that like he's like, oh, Eros is soft and young and beautiful and it causes all this, Eros is virtue and all those things. And like while some of that might be true, it's like Agathon is saying these things to glorify himself. He's a young and up-and-coming man who already has everything that he wants. He's kind of his society's ideal citizen. Like, he's hanging out with all these big names. Like, he is clearly an elite. And it is very elitist, I think, in that way, that, like, love is this way because love looks like me, you know? And I think it's just, I think we can smell that, even if we can't put a finger on why he's modeled Eros after his own image, or like what he would prefer love to be. Again, we talked about this in class too, it's not really balanced. I think that it's not a complete picture of Eros. I think Eros, like if Eros was a real god, he would probably have many faces. He would be a god of contrasts. Probably he'd have things that are heavy and hard, like, I don't know, chains, but also wings to symbolize freedom. Like it would be kind of like those sorts of things. So in conclusion on that thought, it's not so much what Agathon is saying and his speech and his ideas, it's who's saying it and why. So perhaps, Matthew, that is a bit more insight into why we did not like Agathon, or maybe like me, my classmates just do not like the Greeks very much. Cheers. Happy Friday.
Alright, let's try and get back into the groove of things going on here. This time, the questions I have are more suited for just an email, since they're based around some of the ideas I've had for the final project for this class. And since I really doubt anybody else is thinking of making a Doom 2 LOD mod, I'll just leave it at that. To not waste anybody's time, of course. The reading for this week truly stuck out to me, for multiple reasons. First, the 3 speeches this time around were much better than the previous 3, at least in my opinion. While the first 3 speeches presented made points that appealed to logical reasoning somewhat, they were significantly lacking in overall reasonability, and also their arguments were rather flawed. However, these newer 3 were more solid, even if still flawed in a way. Second, these 2 sets of speeches feel as though they should be in reverse order, in the way they're presented. With this current organization, it feels as though the piece isn't putting its best foot forward. Although, I can see how this might be an intentional decision. When introduced to a list of anything, we are most likely to remember the last of the list. Therefore, this may be the method behind the organization, to try and have the better speeches be the ones that are remembered. Third, this was the first instance of a reading being positive about Desire and Eros, or at least one of the first. While we've been exposed to so many arguments casting Desire in a negative light or speaking out against it, Agathon's speech casts a much more positive light on Eros. While it's a pleasant change from the norm, it feels like it's presenting Desire in too much of a positive light. Although this also allows for us to take this presentation of positive interpretation and look at aspects of it that we feel aren't present in other arguments. And along with that, we can put those ideas in conversation with one another. This presentation of what was previously denied to us in the form of Agathon's positivity, in a way demonstrates Lacan's concept of desire in action, in a way. We desired that positivity when it was denied to us, but when we experience it and have it, we no longer desire it. It's not exactly on the nose, but it's worth some consideration, and I think it may give some credit to the concept Lacan presented. This has been me, Christopher Robinson, sitting in a box like a cat after getting scared by my favorite Halloween game, Boo! Haunted House, on the Atari 2600.
Hi, it's me. Wow. So the thing that I wanted to talk about most in this reflection was actually the myth that we spent a lot of our class time talking about, the concept that like all humans had started out as like we didn't ever figure out what shape it was, but it was like not good. I just picture like, you know, those like desert rain frogs. If you Google them, you're in for a very good time. And like if you touch them, they go squee. But so I pictured like 2 of those just like smushed together, and also with their penises out, because we're Greek in this myth. That's what we need to emphasize. Anyway, I thought that it was really interesting because it started out, I kind of had a hard time catching the like tone and the sarcasm of the reading, so it might be wrong, but it started out as like kind of a given that this myth was like accepted, or like if not accepted, then like, yeah, this myth exists, this story exists, everybody is familiar with it, even if we're not going to accept it as fact. Like taking it as, if not necessarily fact, then like, yeah, this could happen. And there wasn't really any like, because this is a series of speeches on love, it makes sense. But it's interesting, I think, how there wasn't really any initial like going over of like the logistics of this world. And I know that I'm overly fond of logistics, but things like, I think that if that had been their focus, then there could have been a really like interesting commentary on like the nature of desire, that humans were stuck together with their soulmate and not like their parent or child or like brother or sister. They didn't go into the incestuous connotations of that. Um, and how that kind of like that myth that all of them took as an acceptable starting point emphasizes romantic and sexual love as more inherent to human nature than familial, parental, platonic, etc. love. Um, and I think that like that's interesting to me, especially in what it says about their society. I think specifically it's something that like this demographic was very much like, I don't think that like a mother or a grandmother or a husband who like, nope, that's not a good point. I'm not going to make it. So I don't. It's like a husband, father, who like really liked his kids. Um, like I don't think that they would have taken that myth like as easily as all of these. I mean, presumably unmarried or like, oh yeah, I have a wife. She's over there somewhere doing womanly things. Uh, like they very much, I feel like it would not be as unquestionably accepted that romantic love was more intrinsic to human nature than other types of love if the demographic making the speeches was different, and specifically like a demographic that was more involved in raising a family. Um, but I think that also like that myth is definitely representative of the wider Greek culture, because these are very much not, well, they're a subculture, but they're very much not like an isolated subculture within Greek culture. These people are like, yeah, we're the most important people of the Greek people, and everybody looks up to us. And like people looked up to them in the society. So to some extent they had control over like the public spheres of discourse. Um, so I think that the myths and things that they perpetuate or take as like granted, like, yeah, this makes sense, definitely reflects onto the value of the Greeks of romantic love over platonic, familial, etc. love. And I'm not much of a Greek anthropologist, but I would be very, very interested to see like how this factored into like common patterns of child raising, or like, yeah, common patterns of child raising, or like the emphasis on a woman marrying as opposed to having children, like which one was more important for her, and like what if you had no male heirs, was that okay? And just kind of what the anthropological implications of this assumption would have been.
So I want to start by saying that um, I wasn't vocal enough in saying that the whole like soulmates as one person then split in half thing, like, it's satire. Like, it's gotta be the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And the fact that, like, what is it? Aristophanes. I'm just gonna avoid pronouncing his name now. But the fact that he was just like, yes, I'm just gonna roll with this absolute batshit wild crazy idea, and everyone's just gonna be like, yes, is like ridiculous. No, like it's totally gotta be satire, and he's like just pushing this whole idea, because it's so absurd and ridiculous to think that like people used to be two people used to be one person, and that they used to be like somehow more complete. I feel like it's more of a like this satirical explanation for like loneliness, like human loneliness in a sense, and that like we wish there was like some sort of this simple of an answer explaining like why we feel alone sometimes, or a lot of the times. Like we wish there was like, oh yes, it's because we all have this one perfect partner set up for us. But like that's not it. So it's almost like a satire of like human loneliness, and thinking that human loneliness is like I guess it's like using humor to cope with tragedy in a sense, like knowing that human loneliness is like sad and universal, and we wish that there was some like easy explanation for why we feel this way, but there isn't. And so we just make fun of this ridiculous idea and say like, oh yes, certainly there's this absolutely weird myth explaining like soulmates that explains like why we feel empty and like we're missing something in life. Yeah. Oh, the other thought I had was that using deformity as the opposite of beauty is first like in I think that was in Socrates' speech mostly, like just defining deformity as the opposite of beauty is like not true. I guess like maybe the Greeks have a different conception than I do, but I would say like deformity is not the opposite of beauty. Ugliness is, and that ugliness is not the same thing as deformity. And also like if they are equating ugliness to deformity, like first of all I think they're wrong, but second of all it's like super ableist to think that like there's like a perfect human like person shape, like that there's an ideal and that we are all like coming off of the ideal in some way and like not reaching that ideal, and we're all like deformed or devolving in some way from that ideal. But like it's still super ableist in assuming that like then if like love is beauty, then like deformity is not love. Like I just can't imagine how Greek society then is like treating people who are not like able-bodied, and like sounds awful. And I can't imagine like what they think of those people, and that they must like not be deserving of love or something because the gods made them this way. And gosh, it sounds absolutely awful, and I hate that idea.